Hello and welcome to the second episode of the CanMar Morning Talk Show. My name is Louie and I'll be your host for today. Today's guest is Necole Hines. Necole has a very lengthy cannabis-filled resume, but most notably, she's the founder of Faded Living, which is a cannabis cooking company, as well as the co-founder of Louder Together, which is an advocacy group that focuses on uplifting people of color within the cannabis space. I had a great time talking with Necole, and she even walked us through one of her cannabis infused recipes, which is really awesome, really easy to make, something to definitely check out. So I hope you all enjoy the second episode of the CanMar Morning Talk Show, and let's dive in. Okay, we are live with Necole Hines. Necole, thank you so much for joining us here on the CanMar Morning Talk Show. How's it going?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. I wanted to firstly explain why you're standing up, which is that you're about to cook a delicious cannabis-infused recipe for us. So you're actually in your kitchen at the moment, in case anyone's wondering.
I'm standing. I'm in my kitchen. I'm making something really easy today because I'm going to make a salad tonight. I'm making pasta and I'm going to do a side salad, a spinach salad. I like to add fruit to my salads just because I tend to cook a lot of spicy food because my background is Jamaican. So I do a lot of Jamaican fusion cooking. So I find that spinach is really, I don't know, I love it because you can cook it and eat it raw. So it's like, double functionality. And then I like to add fruits. So today I might add some berries to the salad, but the main feature is a vinaigrette, an infused vinaigrette that is so super easy to make. And that's what I'll be sharing with you guys today.
Awesome. I'm excited to see it. We were talking off air before about how I actually don't know how to make vinaigrette that well, so this will be exciting for me. But before we dive in, I want to firstly address your resume. I'll take a deep breath before I do this because there's a lot to cover. So you have obviously cannabis cooking as one of your main pillars of what you do. You're also an advocate, an
Yep.
educator, consultant. You founded Faded Living, which is your cannabis cooking company, and you're the co-founder of the
Yes.
Louder Together Cannabis Advocacy Society, which is a non-profit that aims to
Yes.
uplift people of color in the cannabis community. Okay, we
Absolutely.
got through that. It's quite hefty, so congratulations to you. You've obviously done a lot of work in the space. But before we
Thank
kind of
you.
get into your cannabis-infused vinaigrette, Necole, I want to ask you
Yes.
the obvious question, which is, how did you get into cannabis in the first place? And also, not just into cannabis, but into cannabis in a professional setting too, because there's a big distinction, obviously, between those two. So what drew you to cannabis?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I've been a cannabis consumer for probably about over 25 years, um, give or take. And it hasn't always been a consistent journey with cannabis, but I've pretty much consumed on and off through that time frame. And I would say that in the last 5.5 years or so is when my cannabis consumption also included like more of a medicinal or therapeutic kind of approach to things. I had a car accident around that time, about 5.5 years ago, and uh, that's when I had to start making decisions as to what did I want to use for pain management. And I didn't want to use pharmaceuticals at the time. I was using like some just over the counter medication, kind of like Tylenol, Motrin, that type of thing. And then it got to the point where like I was having stomach pains and issues. So I had to go to the doctor and get like medication to counteract that medication
Mm,
that I was taking so much of, and it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. So that's because I had always been supportive of the plant. I had always used it on and off throughout my life. I decided to use cannabis for my pain management and got a prescription for it. I mean, I'm in Canada right now. At the time, I was living in Calgary, Alberta. So I got myself a prescription because in Canada, the medical program has been legalized since about 2001, 2002 or so. So it was safe for me to do so, got my prescription, and then that's how I started consuming cannabis for pain management. And then you just kind of realize, like, oh, my entire use of cannabis has been therapeutic to a certain
Mm,
degree, whether it was for, now I'm using it a lot of times for pain, but other times it was, because I just wanted to find balance in my life, or I needed to sleep, or I needed to be creative. All of those things I find are therapeutic. So that's how I kind of shifted my approach. And so now I just look at cannabis use as more like um, just adult cannabis use, because I feel like, based on your intention is kind of what can determine how the plant can serve you at its best. So that's kind of how that happened. But then I got into the industry though, because around that time, there was talk about Canada becoming legalized. So there was that talk about the rec market becoming legalized in Canada. And I also started to see some of the companies or the people that were going to be big players in the industry, and it wasn't very
mm,
diverse. And considering the fact that, Black and brown people have been so disenfranchised by, the war on
mm.
drugs in whatever country you live on, I felt like I wanted, as a Black woman, to be part of this industry that was quote unquote going to be this $1 billion industry. So that's was my motivation to get into it. I moved from Calgary, Alberta to Vancouver, BC, Canada. So in Canada, Vancouver at the time was like definitely the mecca of the scene. They had a gray market for about 10 years. So I moved here before legalization, and there were like dispensaries everywhere. There was like a really great scene. You could go to events all the time, all this stuff. So I worked for a dispensary called the Vancouver Medicinal Cannabis Dispensary, and it was like the second oldest dispensary that was opened in Vancouver. So there were some staff members that had worked there for 10 years. So I just sat and soaked up
Mm.
information. I would have a notebook most of the times, and I would just kind of like soak up their info. And then after I worked with them for a little bit, I went and I worked for Aurora Cannabis, and I was there for a good 2.5 years, and then left them in November to launch my own company called Faded Living.
Amazing, amazing. And you kind of
Yeah.
touched upon my second question, which is obviously a group louder together. Um,
Yes.
the motivations behind this, as I touched upon before, were to uplift people of color within the space, and you touched on the kind of racially disparate impacts of the war on drugs. Can you tell us a bit more about
Absolutely.
that and what Louder Together does?
Absolutely. So Louder Together came about in January of 2020. So we basically, it was just a group of people in the cannabis space in Vancouver that wanted to have a conversation the about the lack of diversity in the cannabis industry. And the reason why we were prompted to have this conversation is that before COVID, there are all these cannabis conferences happening all over the place. And there was one specifically happening in Vancouver at the time, called the Lift Conference. And, the actual founder, she was just mentioning, when you see a lot of the people that are on the panels of these conferences, they aren't as diverse as they could be. Right. Because it's not like people that look like me are not in the industry doing things. It's just we weren't really being showcased on the forefront of these conferences. So we decided to put together an event to kind of piggyback on the conference, and we had an event called Louder Together, connecting BIPOC people in the cannabis space. So Black, Indigenous, people of color in the cannabis space. So we did this event, and it was on a Thursday morning, so the first day of the conference. We decided to not compete with the other days because there's the cannabis parties and all that kind of stuff. So we chose to do it in the morning, bright and early at like 7:30 a.m. And it was on a day where like it actually snowed in Vancouver, and it doesn't normally. I mean, this is not the snowy city, okay? So people are not about that life, and it was completely packed. You know what I mean? Like in terms of, it was a small space, but we packed the house, and clearly people wanted to hear these conversations. I was a panelist at the time, and kind of, gave my insight of, I was working for a corporation at the time. So kind of to give my kind of advice on things and what to do. And, I'll say it here. My advice was like, um, if you are of color, a woman, etc., like don't be afraid to go into rooms where you are going to be the only one, because people do business with people that they see around a lot, and that's what they do. They don't necessarily go out searching for things. I mean, the climate of times is a little bit different now. I think that companies are trying to do better, but I'm talking about last year where we were still in our old way of things, and people do business with the people that they see in the rooms. So I just recommended that, regardless of what you look like, if you feel like you have something to bring to the table, to make sure that you go to things and, be uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Because the more uncomfortable that we are, the more that they'll get to see us. And the more that, our voices will be heard. So that's kind of how it started. And then over time, after the George Floyd murder, we, a bunch of us in Vancouver decided to kind of, do something about it. And we found out from one of our members that, we kind of gathered with, that the cannabis excise taxes that we pay for, regulated products, a portion of it, or if a large portion of it, goes to the RCMP, which is our, federal police force to enforce the Cannabis Act.
Mm,
So, and in my mind, it was like, okay, that doesn't make any
mm,
sense. Like, that, how do you, hey, we have people that still have records, or, in our uh, brothers and sisters next door to the US, they're still serving time for
mm,
this. You know what I mean? So how is it that some of the taxes go towards this? It just didn't make sense. So we created a petition to ask our government to reallocate those taxes from going to the RCMP, but rather to BIPOC communities and initiatives. And then we had an MP, which is a member of parliament, Matthew Green, who supported this initiative and actually helped us with this petition. And so it ended January 13th, 2021. And so now we're just in the process of seeing when it will actually be presented before the House of Commons. So that's sort of what Louder Together has done thus far. We're still brand spanking new. The petition kind of took a lot of our energy and a lot of our, focus. So that's kind of what we've been doing. And then we're also on social media as well. You'll find us like, searching for Louder Together. And what we try to do on our social media sites is like any articles that we get about BIPOC, amazing folks in the cannabis space doing amazing things, we love to share it so that we're all aware of who are, in the industry and what we're doing. So yeah, it's been good. I'm like excited about the work that we've already started to do and can't wait to do more for the community.
yeah, I mean, since you started only last year, is it? That's quite a lot to have achieved. And I am noticing now, and I don't know if this is just PR and kind of like, marketing ploys, but I do see when I look at US legalization, it seems more and more that they're dedicating this marijuana excise tax in places where it becomes legal to people of color and to kind of
Hmm.
uh, pardoning them, expunging their records, trying to get them back on a career path. Because obviously, imagine we end the war on drugs today, just magic wand, you end the war on drugs. There are still people in prison. And if they get out of prison, they still have
Right.
criminal records or they haven't had,
Mhm.
X amount of years in the workforce. So even though we're making tremendous progress on the cannabis front, there's going to be a long echo of what's been done in the past. And as we know, that's disproportionately affected people of color. So hopefully,
Absolutely.
with Louder Together and people like yourself, that can kind of be accelerated because it's not going to be an easy process. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is something that
Yeah.
needs to happen. It is something that I think will happen. It's just a matter of how long it
I
takes.
absolutely, I agree. And like in Canada, when we became legalized in 2018, like that just wasn't on the radar
Mm.
for them. Like any kind of social equity program or anything like that just wasn't on the table. But the conversations are finally starting to happen now. Like, I mean, I at least it's progress,
Mm.
right? Like, so I would rather talk to you right now to say that there's progress than me say no, nothing's done
Yeah.
at all, right? Like, so I'm happy about that. Do I wish that it could have been done At the get-go, yes, but whatever. It is what it is. Um, you know, at least we're talking and having the conversations now. And in addition to Louder Get Together, there are so many other organizations in Canada, that are doing things to try to make sure that we are talking about this and shedding light to this and actually building some change, so that we're all having, we're all at the table,
Mm.
so to speak, right? Like, and we all have access to this billion-dollar industry, right? So yeah.
Well, I think it's happening. It's definitely happening, and I think it'll continue to happen because the trajectory, even recently, I think it was Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. They actually didn't include any kind of social equity program in their pending legalization. So they're set to legalize, I think, in 2025, although it's become enacted now. They have
Mhm.
no social equity kind of measures taken, and they received a lot of criticism for it. So even in the
Mhm.
instances where states in the US, for example, or perhaps globally, aren't looking to address these things, there is enough kind of social momentum or pressure that, especially in their case, they're going to legalize in 2025. I doubt the bill is going to stay as it is during that time. I think because of people like yourself, again, there's going to be that social pressure to say, hey, look, this needs to change. What are you doing about it? So,
Absolutely. And I know, so what I've learned, um, just by hearing about other states that have legalized and also had a social equity program, that sometimes those programs actually don't serve a great purpose, because sometimes you've got companies that will try to just get that
mm,
status, you know what I mean, by being that, but not actually helping out that, BIPOC or minority company, you know what I mean, that they brought under their wing. So there's a lot of like, it's not perfect, but at least it's a start, right? I mean,
mm,
I'd rather a start, and then we can find out what are, like, I look at that and see, okay, what are the good things? Maybe it was a good thing that Canada didn't start right away, so that we can do it right, you know what I mean? Or start off better or whatever, right? So, I mean, at least we're having the conversations, we're calling out the ones that don't work, and then hopefully trying to create programs that do.
I definitely agree. And just to pivot slightly, or perhaps
Mhm.
hugely, I want to talk about your cooking, your cannabis cooking.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people can find this intimidating. We were kind of talking about that off air. What drew you to
Mhm.
begin cooking with cannabis? And then also, are there any benefits unique to edible cannabis or consumable cannabis as compared with like smoking or vaporizing it?
So I got cooking with cannabis because one thing I forgot to mention when I had said that I had the car accident is that I was running a food business at that time. So I ran a food business called Wings and Tings. I did Jamaican jerk chicken wings and Jamaican patties and salads and things like that. I was in an indoor farmers market pretty much year round and did festivals and all that jazz. So when I had the car accident, it was just too difficult for me to work in the same way
Mm,
physically that I used to. And so when I moved to Vancouver, I was like, I want to get into the cannabis industry. Yeah, that's it. So, like I said, worked in a dispensary. Then I worked for Aurora. But what happened was I ended up bumping into people that knew me from the city I used to live in, because a lot of people move from the former city that I lived in, from Calgary to here. And so they'd be like, hey, are you doing food still? Are you doing food? And then that's when it was like, the universe is telling me that I still need to do food for some reason. So let me do food. But I knew that I couldn't, even though, yes, I'm using cannabis for pain management, at least for me, and I can only speak for myself, cannabis doesn't take the pain away. It just dulls it so that I can have a good life. I can have a decent quality of life. I can still function and whatever, but I still know where the pain is. So it just meant that I still couldn't work in that way. But I knew that doing something like infused dinner parties, you have like intimate parties, things of those natures, teaching workshops like of how to cook. That's something that I had the physical energy and bandwidth to do. So that's kind of where it kind of combined together. I mean, I love cooking and I love food, and then I love cannabis, so why not put it together? So even when I was working with Aurora at the time, I was still doing infused dinner parties and workshops and such on the side. So it was really a nice, easy transition to kind of start my own thing where I'm doing it full fledged. So that's kind of how I, combine the two. But really and truly, like, I have to take it another step further, because I have friends who press rosin. And do you know
Oh, rosin.
about
Yeah,
rosin?
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I have something to show. So I have friends that press rosin, which this is what it looks like when you take the casing off. It usually comes in a little bag. You put about 10 grams of cannabis in a bag, and then you put it in a rosin press, and it kind of squishes the goodness out. I mean, it's all good, but it squishes you know what I mean, the rosin people are going to
Mm,
dab. And then this is left. And what my friends have been wonderful is that they've given me these chips that I can then turn into oil. So each one of these chips, like I mentioned, is roughly about 10 grams or
wow.
so. I mean, this one looks a little broken up, but so basically, I will get a bunch of chips and then I turn that into oil.
Wow.
So using the same method, old school method that you would. So I still will decarb the pucks. The difference is I put it in my oven at about 220 degrees Fahrenheit, but I only decarb it for 20 minutes. I don't do it for the 40-45 minutes that you would if you were dealing with dried bud. And one of the reasons is because it's already been exposed to heat. It's just it hasn't been exposed to enough heat,
Okay.
in my personal opinion. And that's just based on, like, I've done a lot of research online. Some people don't decarb it at all, but I just do it for a short time frame anyways. And then once it's been decarbed, you can put it in your slow cooker, and add your favorite oil, whether it's olive, avocado, coconut, etc. And then I will let that stay on low for about 3 to 4 hours. And then essentially you hardly have anything to really strain out of it, because the pieces are so large, so that your oil ends up being quite there's hardly any residue or anything like that, sediments in there. So that's kind of how I make my oil. And then I do have, it's not here, but I do have the level oil machine, the number 1 and 2. So you're also able to put those rosin chips in the chamber, in their little chamber, and you can also infuse it using machines as well. So I still use dried cannabis. I grow my own. So this is some trim that I have. So I use it all. But I did want to kind of talk about the rosin, because that's really what got me into cooking with it, because getting the product to cook with is a lot of times the hurdle, right?
Mm,
Because it's not cheap to get it. And I was in a situation where I was gifted it. So I mean, hey, why not? And so that's kind of how that happened. It's really super easy. I know it's not that easy to get it, but if you have friends that press rosin, just ask for the chips and you can turn that into oil.
amazing. Well, Necole, the floor is yours if you want to show us your cannabis infused vinaigrette.
Absolutely. So, and my apologies, because because we're in this using this platform, it doesn't work with my phone. I've tried it once before, but that's okay. I'm just going to lift things up as we do. So this is, first off, is one of the most easiest recipes to do. I'm all about easy peasy. The reason why I chose this is I'm getting into understanding terpenes.
Mm,
When I'm cooking with cannabis and picking strains that have, that are heavy in a terpene, and kind of like creating a recipe around it. So in this case, let's uh, say that this was like a high limonene strain. I find that by doing something that has a lot of lemons in it, you're going to kind of get, it's like a win-win situation, in my personal opinion. So I basically just squeezed 3 lemons. So it's just in this little container here, and I'm just pouring it into a mason jar or jar. And this is, you can do it a lot of different ways. This recipe, you can do this recipe where you've got a bowl and a whisk and all of those things. But I also, like I mentioned, like to take the easiest route with everything. And so I'm going to be just making everything in my jar. That's it. Okay. So basically we did some of the lemon juice. Now you can use as much as you want to. I chose 3 lemons. I'm only going to be consuming this myself. So I don't, the way my recipes are is that you can modify it, right? Like, I mean, if you're living with 4 people, then clearly use more
Mm.
lemons. If you're living with people who don't consume, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of why I do some of these recipes so that you can just be able to top things up yourself. So, major thing was the lemon. The other thing that I've done is I've just have some black pepper and salt to taste, whatever works for you. Again, I will provide like a recipe because I do have a recipe, but I always say to people that it is based on your preference. You may not be down with the pepper. That's okay. You know what I mean? It's not going to be a big deal. So now here is the major, golden
Mm.
ticket here. This is the oil. So we talked about how you make the oil. Like I said, it was, I gave you the rosin tip. The only difference with the dried flower is that your process would be longer, and then you're going to have a straining process, right? Because your dried flour is going to be broken up into small pieces when you put it in your oven. You put it on a tray. I like to line it with parchment paper. That's just my personal thing. I recommend that you just break it up into larger pieces as opposed to grinding it, because I've kind of heard that you kind of mess with the trichomes and stuff like that if you grind it too much.
Okay.
So that's kind of why I choose to keep the pieces a little bit bigger, but still broken up a bit. And then I keep it at the same 220 degrees Fahrenheit, but I put it in there for 45 to 50 minutes or
Sure.
so. And the reason why I give a range is that especially is because I've been talking to a lot of Americans lately, especially because, it's COVID and we're all
Mm.
virtual, right? I forget how many homes there have gas um,
Right.
stoves, right? Whereas in Canada, a lot we do have gas too, but a lot of us have electric. Like I have an electric stove, right? So basically, the temperatures are a little bit different and stuff like that, and so that's why there's always a range kind of provided. When you're using the oil infusion machines that are out there on the market, they tend to have been created to be really good at like that temperature control and things of that nature. So that's what they're good for. I think that if you're going to constantly be infusing like small batches of things and whatever, I find that those machines are really good to do. But if you're like I mean, there's nothing wrong with old school. I use both, right? Like I'm just down with it. So I recommend that you put in like you start low with as much with the oil for your first time. So like I would recommend a teaspoon to start with if you're not familiar with
Mm.
edibles, but I am familiar, so I'm just going to put as much as I need to in for my life.
Down the hatch.
And that's right, pretty much. And then the very, very last thing, I'm just looking. Oh, this is it. Okay. So other things that I do recommend that you add to this, you can add red chili pepper flakes if you'd like. You can add parsley flakes if you'd like. You know what I mean? Feel free to add different dried spices to it because it's entirely up to you. If you want to mince some garlic and put in
Mm.
there as well, wonderful. So that's, this is just the base, but you can build up on it. And literally, okay, you've got your lid on and shake.
And that's it.
And friends, this is it.
Wow.
This is it.
I think I
Guys,
could
we're
do this. I think I
done.
could
It's
do
over.
this.
That's why I was like, I could do a smoothie, but this is so easy. It's like it's just small enough now. Like look, it's already
Mm.
mixed. And then basically you take your little spoon and you can drizzle it over, and you're pretty much good to go. Now, what I do recommend though, especially if you're not living alone, is to label your
Mm.
jar. indicate what, if the good thing about us in Canada is that when I purchase cannabis from a dispensary, it does have a lot of information as to like what's the THC content. It's some of them even will tell you like what is the terpene, what I mean, content, etc. Right? So you can put that information on your jar, and then I would date it, and then just pop it in your fridge.
And then does that expire at any point? Like what's
Yeah, so you would think of it as any other vinaigrette that you would make yourself. So I like any sauces that I make myself that are, whether it's a Jamaican jerk sauce or a vinaigrette, I like to give it about 2 weeks as my
Mhm.
maximum. I've made things, I make an infused Jamaican jerk sauce marinade, um, as both infused and non-infused. I've had people that have used it way past 30 days. I'm like, wow, you're brave. I mean, at least it's all vegetables, right? Like it's not like there's anything crazy in it, but I just find for myself personally, like that it is the freshest within sort of a 2 week range type of thing. And that's why you can make them in really small. If you notice, it's not a lot. I
Mm.
did 3 lemons for this. So technically, like, I mean, 2 weeks, you should be able to easily, have a few salads and you'll be good to go type of thing.
Yeah.
Right. And we kind of talked about, you had asked earlier about like, what is, the difference with like, or the health benefits of eating as opposed to like smoking and vaping. And there's just a lot of information out there as to the fact that smoking might not always be the best
Mhm.
route for anything just in general. Like, I mean, even though that's my favorite way to consume personally, but it isn't the healthiest route. Just smoking anything in general isn't always the healthiest route. So that's why eating it is always a great option for those people who don't want to smoke. I found that there are stigmas still around this plant and using of the plant, for many reasons. But one I find has to do with the fact that people don't always want to associate themselves with smoking. People don't want to be connected to that. And so that's why I found that, by cooking with cannabis, educating people on using it on recipes that they already love, it kind of takes away that
Mm.
fear that people may have. So that's kind of where why I even wanted to teach people how to cook with cannabis, right? Like I just felt like to help destigmatize things. Like I said, I mean, I'm going to be putting this on a salad. How normal is that? Like, I mean, whereas most people are so used to the brownies,
Mm.
right? And the like really heavily sugary things, right? That the whole intent is to kind of almost have you couch locked, right? Whereas this is not necessarily trying to do that, right? Like, I mean, this is, you're going to get a nice body feel for most people. I mean, I can only speak from how it affects me. But for me, it does give me like a body relaxation. I'm still able to like function, do sorts of things, but I feel really relaxed. And that is wonderful. Like, I mean, I can't beat that relaxed feeling, right? It's just, it's very different than smoking, right? Like the smoking will be like this instant sort of feeling, but then it's also gone pretty quickly. And then let's not forget that when we do eat with cannabis, the effects don't come on really quickly because it's being processed through your liver. So it can take some time. And so I always recommend people try it out when they're trying it out at first to wait like 30 minutes to an hour, even two if it's your first time, just to double check to make sure that you feel good, you feel kosher, everything's good to go, and then you can continue. But I have learned over time that there are some things that you can do to help you, like if you're feeling uncomfortable, to help you like not feel so uncomfortable. And one thing is black pepper. It's helped me
Okay.
on many, right, and many friends that if you're not feeling well, you can like chew some black peppercorns or sniff black pepper, and like within about 20 minutes or so, a lot of people feel much better. There's CBD, of course, that has helped so many people to counteract that high, but not everybody has
Mm.
CBD on hand. So that's why I always like to bring up the black pepper, because most people have that is the spice that they allow in
Mm.
their lives.
That's one. It's my
So
favorite
most,
one.
right? And then there's also lemons and any citrus, sorry, lemons and oranges and all of the citrus family can also be helpful too. Water, walking. I mean, there's a bunch of different things, but I found that the black pepper has been really helpful to, kind of cut it pretty quickly, as well as CBD, and then the other options kind of help maintain that feeling of I feel better now.
Mm.
So at least there's something to do, because back in the day I had no idea.
Just had to sit in the fetal position.
Or the starfish position. Last time I had a position, I was like in my bed in a starfish, and all that was moving was my eyes from left to right for hours.
Well, something I was going to
So
ask, because you mentioned pepper, orange, citrus can, I guess, counteract the high. For the adventurers out there, are there any foods that would do the exact opposite and exacerbate? Or, for people who want to look out for foods to combine with cannabis?
well, I've heard, and this, I mean, a lot of people, but there's not the studies, there's not the studies. And I'm like, I know there's not the studies, because remember, like, people didn't even want to research
Yeah, very
cannabis
true.
until like recently. So let's not try to, just because there isn't the study doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't mean that it's not true, right? Because we all have our own endocannabinoid system. So we're all going to be affected by it differently. There have been a lot of people, myself included, that mangoes have been able to intensify the feeling of being
Okay.
high when you're eating it. So I've had a mango smoothie, for instance. So I'm kind of glad I was going to do that
Mm,
today as a demonstration. And in fact, I'm kind of glad I
okay.
didn't, because that can take you on a trip. that can take you
Okay.
that can take you on a long, wonderful trip. But it is I believe the myrcene, you know what I mean? For some, I don't know, but for some reason, at least for me, it has definitely upped the
Up the
experience.
ante.
So for those who want to be adventurous and really get with it, make something with mango. A smoothie is great, super super easy. It's pretty much everything I
Mm,
did, but you would put it in your blender with all your fixings that you like to add to it, and then your oil, blend it up, and you're good to go. Like, it's
okay.
that
And
easy.
then do
Yeah.
you have a favorite food to infuse with cannabis?
So I love making a chutney.
Mm,
So I like to do chutneys and break it up during like seasons. So I find that in the winter time, I'll do like an apple pear chutney with dried cranberries and ginger. And a chutney, you can put it, you can eat it with your granola and yogurt. You can have it with ice cream or gelato. If you're a meat eater, you can have it, to complement your ham or pork chops. There's just so many things that you can do with it. In the summertime, I like to do a mango pineapple chutney. That chutney can also, like, if you infuse it, you can just add a few spoons of that chutney into your smoothie,
okay.
right? And you can do, right, like, so you can kind of like do also a lot of the same different things. You can, add it to a sandwich, you can add it to your desserts, whatever, right? So I find that the chutneys tend to be really versatile, and that's why I like to use it to make it infused.
Right. I definitely see what you mean about you mentioned kind of wanting to normalize cannabis. I've heard you say this in other interviews you've done as well. And when you think about like chutney or vinaigrette, these are not risky foods. This is not like, yeah, brownie, which is, even if it's not got cannabis in it, there's still that kind of, I don't know, edge to a brownie where you're like, I know I shouldn't be eating
Yes,
this. And then you compare that to
yes. And
joints.
sometimes you eat more.
Mm,
And sometimes you eat more. How many bowls of salad are you really eating?
not many.
Like, let's be
Not
real.
many. I mean, in my
Right?
experience,
That's my
I'll
point.
say not many. I can't speak for everyone.
Me too. Well, I mean, I'm moving towards a plant-based diet, and I still am not like, after I eat one bowl of salad, I'm not gonna be like, oh my God, I need to eat another one. But when it comes to like some of the sweeter
Mm,
things, wanting to eat another brownie is really tempting. Wanting to eat another infused cookie is very tempting,
mm,
right? So that's kind of why. And I realized that there wasn't a lot of people doing, at least when I started, there wasn't a like the sweet side of things was still really
Yeah.
popular when it came to edibles, right? And so that's why I wanted to kind of shift. And if I'm really living this faded life where I'm, you know, living, breathing it, well, I mean, I don't eat sweets all
Mm.
day. I mean, I like my sweets, don't get me wrong, but I don't eat them all day. So I just wanted to incorporate it. Like one of the best things to do is like with this lovely oil here is adding a little bit to your tea in the morning, adding a little bit to your coffee in the morning. You know what I mean? Again, a very normalized thing to do is have tea and coffee in the morning. So that's kind of what I'm trying to show, that you can really add it to your everyday, and it can be done in small
Mm.
increments so that you're not feeling overwhelmed, right? And CBD is available to a lot of us, right? Especially if you live in a legal country, it is very available. So you should, I recommend, always have it on hand. I kind of use it as a vitamin myself, but I always have a little CBD in my house.
Yeah, well, definitely to your point of even when you were talking about cookies and brownies, my mind is drifting away. But for people who aren't experienced with cannabis infused edibles, that's a recipe for disaster because I know in my experience, if you've got 6 cookies, you've got 10 cookies, if you leave them to me, they won't be there when you return. And if there's cannabis in them,
Right?
it's going to be the same, but I also mentally will not be there when you return. And I think that's true for a lot of people. So things like, vinaigrette,
Absolutely.
for people who are kind of acclimatizing themselves to cannabis infused foods, I think that's a lot of it, a much safer option because they're not going to
That's what I think.
eat the whole, well, they may, depending on how much they make, but it's unlikely they're going to eat more than they should just because of the sugar content,
Absolutely.
addicting them effectively.
Absolutely.
Um, but I want to
Absolutely.
pivot and kind of start wrapping things up, Necole. And I want to ask you, where do you want to see the cannabis industry head over the next 5 years?
Well, in Canada specifically, I can't wait till we can actually have events at
Mm.
facilities or farms or cannabis farms and facilities. I can't wait to get into the cannabis tourism space. There isn't uh, a legal branch of it yet in Canada. I mean, things happen all the time. Clearly, I just mentioned that I was like doing dinner parties and things like that. You know what I mean? So it's happening, but I would love, for Farmgate in Canada to come, sooner than later, so that I can be a part of that. I would love to be able to do events and workshops and speak educational, give educational content, that type of thing at these locations. So that's number one, is what I would love to have. Number two, I'd love for an actual social equity program in the cannabis space, to actually an effective one, you know what I mean, to actually be built and created and up and running within 5 years. I would love to see that. And then to piggyback on that, that in turn would allow for more Black, Indigenous, and people of color to actually, appear and flourish in this industry. And then the final thing is, I can't wait for banking
Mm.
to be you know what I mean? To actually be okay with cannabis. Because even in a legal country, we have a lot of hurdles where that is concerned. And so those are like, if we kind of like tackle all those things, I would be happy. And I think that, I'm seeing a lot of like micro producers pop up, which I'm so thrilled about. Like craft growers is what I want to see. I want to see more of that, and I see that it's happening. So I just want to see more of that. I just want a lot of the barriers to be like, you know, um, to
Mm.
disappear for people of color to get into this space. So
And definitely to your point about banking, and I'm not sure if this is the case in
mhm.
Canada, but I've read in the US, because banks are so reticent to deal with cannabis, you get dispensaries who just carry virtually all their
Yeah,
cash with armed guards. It's a recipe for disaster. Anyone can see that from a mile away.
100%.
So hopefully,
Yeah.
and obviously they will, I think. It's just a matter of time. And then banks will be like,
They, you know what, to be what I've learned is that they, at least for Canada, because we are, the US is our
Mm,
neighbors. And because it's not federally legal
mm,
there, and a lot of our banks do, I mean, I can open up a US bank account in a Canadian, any one of our big financial institutions, right? So we do a lot of business with the US. And I think that's where we're not going to deal with it because, it's still not federally legal there. So there's that, but I think there's still more to it. I think that there's still a stigma. I think a lot of people who make decisions don't get connected to the plant. And my advice to people, including people who own large cannabis companies, are not even connected to the plant. And so my advice, and his will continue to be, is that learn to grow at least one plant,
mm.
at least one plant. Like, I am still learning, and they're sensitive. These plants are sensitive. Like, if you really get to see a plant grow from like seed to actual fruition, and even if you don't do anything with it, you can gift it. You're allowed to do that, right? You were allowed to gift things to people. It's not a crime to do that in Canada. But I think that it would allow people to understand the plant a little bit more if they even took the time to try to grow one,
Mm.
and realize that it is finicky and emotional and all of those things, and can actually grow really easy if you give it a lot of love, right? But a lot of people don't know much about the plant. They just know how much money they can
Yeah.
make, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
that's one good thing about the industry is because of the stigma and because of the history, I think there's this real rebellious nature to the industry where people don't want it to just be a cash cow. Obviously, that's happening, but there's a lot of
oh yeah.
people who want it to be grassroots. They want a lot of small players like craft growers, like you said. They don't want it to be dominated by like big pharma who just comes in now that they see money in it. Now that the dollar signs are ringing in their ears, they just go, okay, we're going to flip 180 degrees and capitalize on this,
Exactly.
and no one else will be able to. So I think the rebellious component of cannabis will hopefully keep it true to the people that use it, um and yeah, hopefully.
And I think that when more people use it, they'll realize how hard it is to um, sell it to the masses in the way that they're trying
Yeah,
to do
very
it,
true.
because it's actually more individual than you
Mm,
think. And because we all, like I mentioned, we all have our own endocannabinoid system. So we are all literally, even though some of us have the same experiences, we're still all affected by it
mm,
differently. Like, what it can do to me could be different for you. And I think the more that people who make decisions about things or that are running things actually use it, they'll understand how individual it really is.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. Where can people find you online?
Absolutely. You can find me at Faded Living on all social media platforms, from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter. I've been lucky that I was able to get that handle
Mm,
all across the board. So I'm excited about that. And my website will be launching in about a week, and it's fadedliving.com.
perfect. Perfect. Well, again, thank you,
Yeah,
Nicole, for joining us. Thank you for your cannabis infused vinaigrette. I urge everyone in legal countries to make that where possible.
absolutely.
Until next time.
Thank you so much. I had a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your
You
day.
too, Nicole. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the CanMar Morning Talk Show. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Necole Hines, and we want to thank you for stopping and spending time with us. Now, remember to check us out on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook at CanMar Events, and keep an eye out for the CanMar Hub community space, which will appear on LinkedIn and will serve as a meeting place for like minded cannabis enthusiasts, educators, and professionals alike to connect. And that's it for today. We will see you next time, where CanMar will continue to bring you endless possibilities.